My husband, Julian, swapped our wedding portrait for a photo of his assistant in a barely there bikini as his phone's wallpaper. I discovered it when he absent-mindedly asked me to grab his phone for him. I smiled, then airdropped a video montage to the living room television. It showed him and her in my apartment, all captured by the security cameras I'd installed. His parents were in the room. His mother's hand flew to her mouth. His father shot up from his chair, and then the sound of his palm connecting with his son's face silenced the room. The champagne was perfectly chilled, a classic Sinatra tune was playing at a low volume, and the rich aroma of braised short ribs, Julian's absolute favorite, filled the air of our stylish downtown apartment. Our 7th anniversary dinner had to be flawless. 7 years of marriage. It had been a whirlwind of 4 different apartments, a couple of major career promotions for each of us, one shared dream of a future home in the suburbs, and an uncountable number of whispered promises. I adjusted the fabric of my simple black dress, the one he always claimed made the flecks of gold in my brown eyes sparkle, and glanced at my watch. "Clara, have you seen my phone? I swear I left it on the kitchen island." Julian's voice floated down from our bedroom, carrying that slight tone of impatience that had become all too common in recent months. "I'll check for you," I called back, my eyes scanning the pristine quartz countertops until they landed on his phone, a dark monolith next to the artisan salt and pepper mills. The moment I picked it up, the screen came to life with a cascade of notifications, and the air was instantly stolen from my lungs. The picture that had once been there, our favorite from our wedding day, a candid shot of us laughing uncontrollably on a beach in Italy, was gone. In its place was Sophie, Julian's junior assistant, posed in a microscopic string bikini on what was clearly a high-end hotel balcony. Her platinum blonde hair was caught in a gentle breeze, and her smile was aimed with practiced flirtation at the person holding the camera, my husband. Before I continue Clara's story, I want to say thank you for being here for this raw and honest look at betrayal and the fight for self-respect. If you find yourself drawn to stories about women who refuse to be broken, who harness their intellect and inner fire to reclaim their lives, I invite you to subscribe. It costs nothing, and you'll be the first to know when we release another story about transforming devastation into empowerment. Now, let's get back to the moment Clara's carefully constructed world started to fracture. My fingers felt like they were flash frozen around the phone. The warm, inviting light of the kitchen suddenly seemed harsh and clinical, the soft music and abrasive noise. I just stared at the image on the screen, blinking slowly, as if the simple act of closing my eyes could somehow reset reality. Sophie had been with Julian's advertising agency for less than a year. She was young, fiercely ambitious, armed with a fresh marketing degree and what my husband had enthusiastically called a groundbreaking perspective for the agency, where he was a senior creative director. "Did you find it?" Julian called out again, and I could hear his footsteps approaching on the stairs. With a composure honed over a decade of high-stakes legal battles, the same poker face I used when opposing counsel tried to blindside me with an unexpected motion, I placed his phone back exactly where I had found it, screen side down. "It's on the island," I said, my voice a marvel of steadiness while my entire inner world was being reduced to a pile of smoldering ruins. Julian walked into the kitchen, a vision of casual elegance in his crisp designer slacks and the expensive linen shirt I'd bought him for his last birthday. He flashed me that signature lopsided grin, the one that used to make my heart flutter for reasons that were now the polar opposite of why it was hammering against my ribs. "Thanks, honey," he said, grabbing the phone without a second thought and slipping it into his pocket. "Those short ribs smell incredible." I watched him get a glass of water, observing the familiar, confident way his hands moved, his gold wedding band still a permanent fixture on his finger. And in that precise moment, a chilling, razor-sharp clarity washed over me. 10 years as a corporate litigator had drilled one indispensable lesson into my brain. You never, ever show your hand too soon. Your parents are still planning on 7, right? I asked, my hands reaching for the wine glasses as if this were just another ordinary Thursday. Yep, Dad texted me a little while ago, said they're excited to celebrate with us. I nodded, my mind racing with cold calculations behind a mask of placid domesticity. Arthur and Eleanor Vance, my in-laws for 7 years. Arthur, a retired, highly decorated federal judge. Eleanor, the former headmistress of a prestigious prep school. They both worshiped their only son, their perfect golden boy who could do no wrong. For the next hour, as Julian took a shower and I added the final touches to our anniversary dinner, my mind worked with the dispassionate precision of a surgeon. The picture on his phone wasn't just a simple act of betrayal, it was evidence. And where there was one piece of evidence, there were undoubtedly more. That night, as we ate dinner with his parents, I observed Julian as if he were a hostile witness on the stand. I saw the subtle way he angled his body to check his phone under the tablecloth. I noted how he brought up Sophie's name twice, cloaked in professional praise that felt just a little too effusive. I saw the faint blush creep up his neck when Eleanor asked about his upcoming work trip to San Francisco. 3 days later, using the excuse of a supposed increase in break-ins in our building, I hired a security company to install a network of discrete cameras throughout our apartment. Julian, preoccupied with what he called a crisis-level project that kept him at the office past 9 nearly every night, barely registered their presence. "It's this massive new campaign for Sterling Automotive," he'd explained, pulling off his tie one night as he finally walked through the door. "Sophie and I are having to rebuild the entire pitch from the ground up." I nodded with a practiced air of sympathy, playing the part of the supportive, understanding wife, while my own phone was silently uploading every camera feed from our home to a secure, private cloud server. The following Tuesday, Julian sent a text saying he'd be working late again. I ordered myself some Thai food, poured a generous glass of Malbec, and settled onto our plush sofa with my laptop. For 4 agonizing hours, I scanned through mind-numbing footage of empty rooms, the cat stretching on the rug, sunlight shifting across the floor. And then, at 2:17 p.m., the front door opened. Julian entered first, laughing at something over his shoulder. He was followed by Sophie, who was wearing the same stylish blue dress I'd seen in photos from a recent company awards dinner. They were supposed to be at a client presentation on the other side of town. I watched, my body paralyzed, as my husband gave his assistant a tour of our home. The home I had painstakingly designed, the home my salary as a senior associate paid for over 60% of. When they moved toward our bedroom door, I slammed my laptop shut with such force that it cracked the corner of the screen. My wine glass toppled over, spilling a dark red stain across our pristine, cream-colored rug, spreading like a pool of blood from a fatal wound. I didn't even try to clean it up. In the weeks that followed, I became a specter, haunting my own life. I led partner meetings at my firm, drafted intricate contracts, and negotiated with clients, all while methodically gathering evidence with a cold, detached focus. The timestamps on the security footage lined up perfectly with Julian's texts about late nights at the office. Credit card statements revealed a pattern of intimate dinners for 2 at restaurants I had never been to. There were hotel charges on days he was supposedly attending all-day seminars. I cataloged every single infraction in a password-protected folder I labeled Anniversary Presentation. It was a darkly appropriate title for the case I was building. The mountain of evidence grew higher each day, while on the surface, I remained the same Clara Vance, a highly competent attorney, a devoted wife, meticulously planning a beautiful 7th anniversary party for her husband and his parents. The most difficult part wasn't the betrayal itself, though that burned through my chest like acid at the most unexpected times. The hardest part was the performance. It was asking about his day when I had already watched a high-definition recording of where he had actually been. It was lying next to him in our bed at night, wondering if his dreams were filled with her. It was washing our bed sheets, knowing they held the physical proof of betrayals I had been forced to witness through a cold digital lens. One night, as I was reviewing the latest upload, I watched them in our kitchen. She was perched on the very granite countertop I had fought for during our renovation, and he was standing between her legs, his hands braced on either side of her. In that moment, something inside me didn't just break, it hardened into a core of unyielding steel. The anniversary dinner with his parents was no longer just an opportunity for exposure. It was a necessity. It was about justice. I would not crumble. I would not descend into screaming hysterics or start throwing his expensive belongings out the window. I would employ every skill I had spent a decade honing in the legal field to present my case flawlessly, and Julian, Sophie, Arthur, and Eleanor would be my captive audience. And when the final judgment was rendered, I would walk away with my dignity fully intact, leaving behind nothing but the shattered pieces of the perfect lie we had pretended to live. The morning after I made my final decision, I woke up next to Julian feeling as if I were in a stranger's body. His arm was thrown casually across my stomach, a gesture of ownership he no longer had any right to. I carefully slid out from under his touch, not wanting to wake him, and went into the shower. There, I allowed myself exactly 10 minutes to let silent, hot tears mix with the water streaming down my face. 10 minutes to grieve, and then the mask would be put back on. "Big day at the office?" Julian asked as we had coffee, his eyes landing on my formal charcoal power suit. I forced a small smile as I stirred my coffee. "Deposition for the Northwood merger. It's going to be a long one. I might not be home until late." The lie slipped out so easily it scared me. Before all this, I had never once been dishonest with him. "No worries, I've got that client dinner with the Sterling Automotive guys tonight anyway." I just nodded, mentally filing the information away. I had obsessively checked his shared calendar that morning. There was no client dinner. It was another thread for me to pull, another piece of the rotten tapestry to unravel. Once I got to work, I closed my office door and pulled out a new leather-bound journal I had bought for this exact purpose. It was a deep crimson, the color of both passion and a warning. Inside, I started to document everything: dates, times, inconsistencies, and the subtle patterns in Julian's lies. The methodical outlining I had used to pass the bar exam was now being used to build a case against my own marriage. Tuesday, claimed client dinner with Sterling Automotive. Called the agency's front desk. No such dinner was scheduled. Credit card alert showed a charge at the Oak Room bar for $92. Wednesday, said he was working late. Location tracking on his car showed him at Sophie's apartment complex from 7:40 p.m. to 11:15 p.m. Thursday, found a receipt in his coat pocket, a pair of diamond earrings from a boutique jeweler, $1,500. Not for me. Week after week, the journal filled with these clinical, damning observations. Each entry was another small, precise cut to my heart. The woman meticulously documenting these betrayals and the woman who smiled at Julian across the breakfast table felt like two completely different people. One was stockpiling ammunition, the other was maintaining essential cover. "You seem a little stressed lately," my colleague Olivia remarked over salads one afternoon. "Everything okay on the home front?" "Just anniversary planning," I replied, the practiced smile materializing instantly. 7 years is a big one, you know. It was a milestone, all right. The strain of living this double life was immense. Every morning I applied concealer under my eyes with a careful hand, hiding the dark circles from nights spent poring over security footage. I'd laugh at Julian's jokes at dinner parties with our friends, all the while doing mental gymnastics, figuring out how to gain access to our joint financial records without raising any red flags. My chance came when Julian announced a 3-day marketing conference in Denver. It was a real conference, I quickly verified, though whether he'd actually be attending all the sessions was highly questionable. The morning he left, I called in sick to work for the first time in my career. My hands trembled as I logged into our joint banking portal. We kept our salaries in separate accounts, but we had a shared one for household expenses and investments. I methodically went through 6 months of statements, taking screenshots of every single charge that screamed of infidelity. Rosewood Jewelers, $1,522.50. Weekend getaway at the Mountain View Lodge, $850. Vinters Select Wine Club, $450. Sophie's favorite Napa winery, according to her Instagram. Each discovery was another digital file, another nail in the coffin of our marriage. I was no longer just collecting evidence of an affair. I was now documenting financial infidelity. Julian was using our shared money to fund his double life. That same day, I took a calculated risk and installed 2 more cameras myself. One was hidden inside a stack of books in our bedroom closet, where he often took what he called private work calls, and the other was a tiny pinhole camera angled toward our master bathroom. The existing cameras had caught them in the public spaces of our home, but I needed a comprehensive, undeniable record. Every legal instinct I had screamed at me about invasion of privacy, but my wounded heart had long since overruled my professional ethics. "How was Denver?" I asked when Julian returned, his travel bag slung over his shoulder. Exhausting, just back-to-back panels on emerging media trends. He kissed my cheek, and I had to physically restrain myself from recoiling and wiping the spot. "How about I take you out for a nice dinner tonight to make up for being gone?" I smiled and nodded. "That sounds lovely." While he was in the shower, I checked the location history on his phone, a backdoor I had found weeks ago. The swarm of blue dots showed his movements clustered around high-end hotels in downtown San Diego, nowhere near Denver. Just another entry for the Crimson Journal. This dual existence became my new normal. Watching him lie directly to my face, accepting his excuses with a serene smile, and then documenting the truth the moment he left the room. I became a masterclass actress, laughing at all the right moments, even initiating intimacy on occasion to keep his suspicions at bay, all while silently constructing the case that would end our life together. One night, he reached for me in bed, his hand tracing the curve of my hip. I didn't pull away, though every cell in my body screamed at me to. I played my part, responding to his touch, while my mind dispassionately cataloged the mechanics of the act. The performance was so convincing that he fell asleep afterward with his arm draped protectively around me, completely oblivious to the icy detachment of the woman lying beside him. As our anniversary drew closer, I started to plan the final act with the same meticulous detail I would use to prep a key witness for trial. The dinner had to include his parents, Arthur and Eleanor, who had always treated me like the daughter they never had. Their presence was non-negotiable. Julian's entire self-worth was tied to their approval. The timing had to be perfect. After the main course, but before dessert, when everyone was relaxed and their guards were down. I practiced my breathing exercises. I rehearsed potential responses to his inevitable denials. And I braced myself for the looks of pure shock that would soon be on his parents' faces. The security footage was edited down into a tight, 3-minute supercut. It was short enough to be impactful, but long enough to be irrefutable. There was nothing explicit, but it was utterly damning. "Mom and Dad are really looking forward to Saturday," Julian mentioned casually, just 3 days before the anniversary. "Dad's even bringing that 25-year-old single malt he's been hoarding." "That's so thoughtful of him," I replied, a vivid image of Arthur's face flashing in my mind. I wondered if he would still want to toast to our marriage after he saw what his son had been up to. The night before the dinner, I stood in my kitchen, rehearsing my calm facade one last time. Tomorrow, the performance would finally be over. The evidence was ironclad, the plan was flawless. 7 years of marriage were about to be concluded in a single, devastating evening of revelation. As I chopped vegetables for the next day's meal, Julian came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. "Happy almost anniversary," he murmured into my hair. I leaned back against him, playing my part to the very end. It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? I said, my voice perfectly level, betraying none of the thunderous truth that was about to be unleashed. Indeed, it had been. A journey from love and hope to deceit and calculated justice. And tomorrow, at precisely 8:15 p.m., the mask was finally coming off. The morning of our anniversary dawned with a crisp, golden autumn light filtering through our apartment windows. I had been wide awake since 4:30 a.m., my mind buzzing with the weight of what the evening held. The profound irony of preparing a feast to celebrate the end of a marriage was not lost on me. I moved around the kitchen with the methodical grace of a well-rehearsed actor, chopping fresh herbs for the short ribs, whisking the vinaigrette for the salad, and setting the table with our finest wedding china. Every single action felt like a scene from a play, the perfect wife preparing a special meal for her beloved, but the script was about to take a shocking turn that only I had read. Julian came downstairs around noon looking refreshed and smiling. "Need a hand with anything?" he asked, planting a light kiss on my cheek that felt like a brand. "I've got it all under control," I replied, my voice a testament to my years of courtroom training. "But could you run out and get the wine? Arthur mentioned he was hoping for that special Cabernet from the Ridgewood estate." "Sure thing," he said, grabbing his keys. "I can't wait for tonight. 7 years with the most brilliant lawyer in Boston deserves a real celebration." As soon as the front door clicked shut behind him, I allowed myself a single moment of weakness. I gripped the edge of the quartz countertop until my knuckles turned white. 7 years, 412 pieces of evidence, one gut-wrenching video file queued up and ready on my phone. By 6:30 p.m., the apartment was filled with the savory aromas of garlic and rosemary. I had changed into a simple, elegant black dress, a color appropriate for both a celebration and a funeral. The dining room table glittered under the soft glow of candlelight, and our large wedding portrait on the wall seemed to watch over the entire scene like a cruel, silent joke. The doorbell rang at precisely 6:55 p.m. I took one last deep, steadying breath, checked my composed reflection in the hallway mirror, and opened the door to Arthur and Eleanor Vance. "There she is!" Arthur boomed, enveloping me in a powerful hug. At 70, the retired judge still possessed the commanding aura that had once made seasoned attorneys quake in their boots. "Happy anniversary, my dear." Eleanor embraced me next, her signature lilac perfume wrapping around me. "We brought you something," she whispered with a conspiratorial wink, holding up a pair of beautifully wrapped gift bags. "And I brought the good stuff," Arthur added, producing a bottle of incredibly expensive scotch. "Now where is that boy of mine?" As if on cue, Julian emerged from the kitchen, greeting his parents with a display of genuine, heartfelt affection. Something twisted like a knife in my chest as I watched him. The charming son, the adoring husband, I knew the truth that festered just beneath that flawless surface. Dinner proceeded with a practiced, comfortable normalcy. I served the meal, poured the wine, and engaged in light conversation about city politics and Julian's latest projects at the agency. "The Sterling campaign is finally taking off," Julian explained, swirling his Cabernet. "We've got some truly innovative concepts in the pipeline." "And it's all thanks to that wonderful assistant of yours, isn't it?" Eleanor said, completely unaware of the bomb she was handling. "Sophie, right? You've mentioned how indispensable she's been." I watched Julian's face like a hawk. I saw the almost imperceptible tightening around his eyes, the split-second hesitation before he formulated his reply. "The whole team has been fantastic," he deflected smoothly. "Speaking of fantastic teams," Arthur said, raising his glass high, a toast to 7 spectacular years for these two. "Julian, you could not have possibly chosen a better partner in life." "I know," Julian agreed, his eyes meeting mine as he reached for my hand across the table. I let his fingers close over mine, feeling nothing but a cold, steely resolve. After I cleared the dinner plates, I excused myself to the kitchen, using the pretense of getting dessert. In reality, I took 30 seconds to center myself, to control my breathing, and to grab my phone from its hiding spot. The video file was open, ready to be cast to our living room's smart television. There was no going back now. When I returned to the dining room, Eleanor was mid-story about one of Julian's childhood achievements. "He was always so driven when he set his mind to something," she was saying. "Do you remember that statewide science fair in 10th grade, Julian? You spent months building that ridiculous robot." "Speaking of memories," I interjected seamlessly, setting a perfect New York cheesecake, Julian's favorite, in the center of the table. "We never got around to showing you the pictures from our trip to the Cape last month." Julian smiled, visibly relieved at the change of topic. "Oh, right. They're on my phone somewhere." "Why don't you find them and show your mom?" he suggested. "She'd love the sunset pictures from the ferry." As he fumbled for his phone, I casually picked up my own. "Actually, I have some even better ones. Let me just put them on the TV so we can all see them better." No one batted an eye. It was something we did all the time during family get-togethers. With a few taps, I connected my phone to the large screen mounted on the wall. My heart was a drum against my ribs as I selected the file named Anniversary Presentation. "I put together a little slideshow," I explained, my voice shockingly even. "Just a few highlights from our 7 years together." The screen flickered on. The first image was, as promised, from our wedding. Julian and I on that beach in Italy, his arms around me. His parents made soft, appreciative sounds. Julian smiled, starting to reach for my hand again. I pulled my fingers away just as the image on the screen changed. The first thing that appeared was a timestamp, 2:17 p.m., Tuesday, October 4th. Our living room appeared in crystal clear focus. The front door opened. Julian's smile froze, melting off his face. The video showed him walking into our apartment with Sophie right behind him. Their laughter was silent, but their body language was deafening. His hand was on the small of her back. Her fingers were tangled in his hair. "What is this?" Julian's voice was a choked whisper. He made a move for the remote, but I had already placed it on the far side of the room. Arthur and Eleanor were completely still, their initial confusion rapidly morphing into horrified comprehension as the footage played on. Julian leading Sophie down the hall toward our bedroom. "Clara, turn it off," Julian hissed. He was on his feet now, his face completely drained of all color. "That's just the introduction," I replied calmly, though my pulse was racing. "There's more. There's the kitchen counter footage from last Thursday. There's the footage from the master bathroom from Monday morning while I was in court. And, oh, my personal favorite, you two during our anniversary weekend last year when I was in New Hampshire visiting my mother after her surgery." Eleanor's sharp gasp echoed in the sudden silence. Her hand was clamped over her mouth, her eyes wide with a pain that mirrored my own. Arthur remained perfectly still, his face turning a deep, dangerous shade of crimson. "This is all time-stamped, documented, and backed up to a secure server," I continued, my voice taking on the precise, unwavering tone I used in the courtroom, "as are the financial records showing the gifts you purchased for Sophie using our joint account, the hotel bills, the text messages." Julian stared at me, then at his parents, then back at the screen where the silent, damning evidence of his secret life continued to play. "Julian Vance." Arthur's voice was a low, guttural growl I had never heard from the normally composed judge. "What have you done?" The storm I had so carefully orchestrated had finally broken, and as Julian began to stammer, desperately trying to form an explanation, I simply stood and watched the destruction, feeling a strange, quiet sense of detachment. 7 years of marriage disintegrating right before my eyes, and yet all I could feel was the clean, quiet satisfaction of justice, finally and unequivocally being served. Arthur Vance rose from his chair with the deliberate, heavy slowness of a man struggling to contain a volcanic eruption of fury. The very air in the room seemed to thicken under the weight of his anger. Julian instinctively took a step back, his hands held up in a weak, defensive posture. "Dad, I can explain," he started, but the words died in his throat. The sharp, cracking sound of Arthur's open palm striking Julian's cheek reverberated through our dining room like a gunshot. Even with 7 years of navigating Chicago's most ruthless courtrooms, I was not prepared for such a raw, visceral display of parental shame. Julian stumbled backward, his hand flying to his reddening cheek, pure shock etched onto his handsome features. "Don't you dare call me that right now," Arthur growled, his voice trembling with a rage that shook his entire body. "Your mother and I raised you to be better than this." Eleanor was still frozen in her chair, silent tears carving paths down her elegantly lined face. Her manicured fingers were clenched around the edge of our mahogany dining table, the one we'd found together at an antique market on a weekend trip, a memory now tainted and ugly. The cheesecake sat there, a perfect untouched monument to the lie our lives had become. "It's not what you think," Julian tried again, a pathetic, desperate whine creeping into his tone. "Sophie and I, it was just work stress. It was a mistake, a one-time thing that got out of hand." A small, hollow laugh escaped my lips. "One time? Julian, I have footage spanning the last 8 months, 73 separate instances that took place in our home alone." The clinical precision of my accounting seemed to land like a series of physical blows. His eyes darted between his horrified parents and me, desperately searching for an exit that simply did not exist. The video continued its silent, ghostly chronicle in the background, an accusation that no one could tear their eyes from. "Turn it off," Eleanor finally whispered, her voice fractured. "Please, Clara." I nodded and hit pause on my phone, but I didn't turn off the television. The frozen image of Julian kissing Sophie in our kitchen hung in the air like a death sentence. "When?" Arthur demanded, his towering presence still looming over his son. "When did you become this person?" Julian collapsed back into his chair, suddenly looking years older than 36. "It just happened," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. "We were working late. We had some drinks to celebrate the Sterling account." 8 months ago," I supplied, my voice devoid of emotion. "Right around the time I made junior partner, while I was pulling 16-hour days to build our future, you were building a relationship with your assistant." I moved around the table and retrieved a thick manila folder from the sideboard. My hands were perfectly steady as I laid out the contents, printed screenshots of texts, highlighted credit card statements, hotel folios. Each piece of evidence was impeccably organized by date. The litigator in me couldn't help but feel a grim sense of pride in the thoroughness of my work. "Diamond earrings," I said, pointing to one receipt, charged to our joint account the day after I won the landmark Westfield case. A weekend at the Mountain View Lodge while I was visiting my mother in the hospital. Dinner at Giovanni's, the restaurant where you proposed to me, on Sophie's birthday. Julian didn't even look at the papers. His gaze was fixed on some distant, invisible point over my shoulder, completely unable to meet anyone's eye. "This is why you've been so distant," Eleanor said softly, her initial shock now replaced by a deep, painful understanding. "All those family events you were too busy for, the holidays you said you had to work through. Sophie needed me," Julian said weakly, as if that explained everything. The words hung in the charged air for a long, excruciating moment before Arthur exploded. "Needed you?" His fist slammed down on the table, making the wine glasses jump. "Your wife needed you. Your family needed you. We welcomed you into our home for Christmas while you were carrying on with her." He couldn't even say her name, so overcome with disgust. I had never seen Arthur Vance at a loss for words. The retired federal judge who could deliver hour-long oral opinions from memory was now stammering with pure rage. "I was going to end it," Julian tried, his voice now taking on a desperate, pleading tone. "After the marketing summit in Miami next month, I was going to break things off with Sophie and recommit to us, to our marriage." That was news to me. Just another lie to add to the towering mountain of them. I studied my husband's face, searching for any flicker of the man I had married. The college sweetheart who wrote me terrible poetry during finals. The fiancé who surprised me with picnics in the park. The newlywed who whispered dreams of watching our grandchildren play in a big backyard. He was gone. This panicked, cornered man was a complete stranger. "How convenient," I said coolly. "And what about the trip to Aruba you booked for Sophie's birthday in January, the one you paid for using the airline miles from our shared travel account?" Julian went pale. "How did you—" "I'm a lawyer, Julian. Gathering evidence is what I do for a living." Eleanor stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. I can't be here right now," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I need some air." She walked toward the front door on unsteady legs. Arthur looked torn between his desire to follow his wife and his need to continue confronting his son. His paternal instinct won out. He shot Julian one last withering glare before going after Eleanor. "Don't you move," he commanded his son. "We are not finished here." In the deafening silence that fell after the front door closed behind them, Julian and I were left alone, facing each other across the wreckage of our anniversary dinner. 7 years of marriage, reduced to forensic evidence on a television screen. "How long have you known?" he finally asked, his voice small and broken. "Long enough to be certain," I replied, feeling strangely numb, detached from the raw agony that should have been consuming me. "Long enough to prepare." Julian reached for my hand. I pulled it back before his fingers could touch mine. "Clara, please, we can fix this. Couples counseling, a fresh start. I'll fire Sophie tomorrow, I swear." I stood and smoothed the front of my black dress. "Your parents will be back any minute. I'm going to pack a bag. I'll be staying at Olivia's tonight." "You're leaving?" The panic in his eyes was absolute. "Now? Like this?" "Did you honestly think I would stay?" I asked, a note of genuine curiosity in my voice. "Did you think I would watch that video and then just— what? Forgive you? Help you clean up the cheesecake and pretend it never happened?" "I love you," he said, the words sounding desperate and hollow. "One mistake shouldn't erase 10 years together." 73 mistakes, I corrected him, in our home alone. I walked toward our bedroom, pausing in the doorway to look back at the man who was, for a few more months, still legally my husband. "Don't follow me. You have enough to deal with when your parents get back." Upstairs, I packed with swift efficiency. Toiletries, a few suits for work, my laptop, important documents. The overnight bag I had prepared a week ago was sitting ready in my closet. As I zipped it shut, I heard the front door open and Arthur's voice, low and angry, rising from the living room. I slipped out the back service door, my car keys clutched so tightly in my hand they bit into my palm. The cool night air of the city hit my face like a benediction, washing away the suffocating, deceitful atmosphere of our home. And as I drove away from the apartment, away from the marriage, away from the entire life I had believed was real, a completely unexpected emotion washed over me. It wasn't grief. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even heartbreak. It was freedom. Olivia's guest room became my sanctuary for that first week. It was 7 days of ignoring the endless barrage of calls from Julian, reading and deleting the worried texts from Eleanor, and listening to a single solemn voicemail from Arthur that simply said, "We're here for you when you're ready, Clara." Olivia's quiet, unwavering support, a fresh coffee left by the bathroom door every morning, takeout containers of my favorite food, and evenings with no pressure to talk, gave me the space I needed to begin processing the seismic implosion of my life. "You can stay as long as you need, you know that," she said on the 8th morning, leaning against her kitchen counter as I stared into my mug. "But you should probably get back to the office before Shaw reassigns your entire caseload." She was right. I'd used a week of emergency personal leave, but hiding wouldn't build my new life. The law had always been my anchor, the one logical system I could rely on when everything else was chaos. I'll go in tomorrow, I decided, feeling the first flicker of my old self returning. It was time to face the music. The office of Covington Shaw Associates went quiet the moment I walked through the glass doors on Monday morning. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Eyes followed me down the long hallway to my office. News travels at the speed of light in Boston's tight-knit legal community, especially when it involves a retired federal judge's son and a rising star junior partner. Robert Shaw, one of the firm's senior partners, was standing in my doorway before I'd even had a chance to put down my briefcase. "Clara," he said, his voice a carefully calibrated neutral, "can I see you in my office?" In his massive corner office overlooking the harbor, Robert didn't waste time. "Julian called the firm, twice, said you were unreachable and that he's very concerned about you." I met his gaze without flinching. "I've separated from my husband, Robert. I'm not incapacitated. The documents for the Henderson acquisition will be on your desk by noon." A flicker of approval crossed his face. "Good. And the Robertson deposition?" "Scheduled for Thursday. All exhibits are prepped and ready." Robert gave a single satisfied nod. "Divorce is messy, Clara, but it doesn't have to be a career killer. Keep delivering the way you always have, and this firm will have your back." The conversation was quintessential Robert Shaw, blunt, practical, and blessedly free of prying questions or pity. When I walked back to my office, the whispers started up again, but this time I walked with my head held a little higher. 2 weeks after the anniversary dinner, I finally went back to the apartment. Our apartment. My apartment. Julian had moved out at Eleanor's firm insistence, taking up temporary residence in his parents' guest room like a sullen teenager grounded for breaking curfew. I had the locks changed anyway. Standing in the middle of our bedroom, I surveyed the wreckage of our marriage. His dresser drawers were half empty. The bathroom counter was missing his shaving kit. The closet had gaping holes where his suits used to hang. I stripped the king-size bed completely, bundling the expensive sheets and duvet and stuffing them into a garbage bag for donation. Some stains, I knew, could never be washed clean. The divorce proceedings began with a clinical speed that was a testament to being an attorney with a network in the city. I hired Veronica Croft, a legendary divorce lawyer known for her take-no-prisoners approach, especially in cases of infidelity. "You've already done most of my job for me," Veronica noted with a wry smile as she reviewed the meticulous evidence I had compiled. "Most of my clients come to me with suspicions and screenshots of texts. You've brought me a fully prepared, court-ready case." Julian hired a slick attorney from his own corporate network. Their initial offer was laughably insulting. Julian would keep the apartment, I would receive a token cash settlement, and we would both sign a strict NDA. "He's concerned about your career, Clara," his lawyer explained with practiced sincerity during our first mediation session. "The publicity around these circumstances could do significant damage to your professional reputation." Veronica's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "My client has time-stamped, high-definition video of your client committing adultery in their marital home, a home she pays the majority of the mortgage on. Would he prefer we present that evidence in open court instead?" The next offer was substantially more reasonable. 3 months into the separation, I received an unexpected invitation to lunch from Arthur. We met at a quiet, old-school Italian place, far from the downtown legal district. He was already seated, a glass of iced tea in front of him, his expression as grave as it had been on the bench for 40 years. "Julian has been removed from the Sterling Automotive account," he said after we ordered, getting straight to the point as always. It was his largest client. I nodded, not surprised. "The industry is small. Word gets around." "It wasn't gossip that cost him the account," Arthur replied, his eyes meeting mine directly. "It was me. I've been playing golf with Jim Sterling for 30 years. When I told him what happened, what my son did to you. He pulled the account from the agency the next day. The revelation should have felt like a victory, but it just left a hollow ache in my chest. You didn't have to do that, Arthur. Yes, I did, he countered firmly. Actions have consequences. A lesson my son seems to have forgotten somewhere along the way. He reached across the table, his large, warm hand briefly covering mine. You are still family to us, Clara. That does not change just because my son failed you so profoundly. The steadfast loyalty of my soon-to-be ex-in-laws was one of the strangest, most grounding aspects of the entire ordeal. Eleanor called me every week, not to plead Julian's case, but just to see how I was holding up. Arthur's connections in the legal world quietly smoothed paths that might have otherwise been challenging. Their character, even as their own son's life was coming apart at the seams, was a source of quiet strength for me. 6 months after that disastrous anniversary dinner, the divorce was finalized. I kept the apartment, all of my own retirement accounts, and received a settlement that financially acknowledged Julian's infidelity and his use of shared assets without publicly dragging him through the mud. The day I signed the final papers, I walked out of the courthouse and felt a physical weight lift from my shoulders. That evening, I stood in my living room, truly my own now, and took stock of the space. Every piece of furniture was a memory. The sofa where we had cuddled and watched movies, the dining table that had become a courtroom, the very walls that had been the silent witnesses to his betrayals. The next morning, I called a realtor. Moving into a bright, modern apartment with a floor-to-ceiling view of the Charles River was the true beginning of my new life. I filled it with furniture that I chose, and I chose alone. I arranged it exactly as I wanted, with no compromises. The simple freedom to make my own decisions, from the color of the bath towels to what I wanted to do on a Saturday night, was intoxicating. At work, my reputation slowly but surely shifted from being Julian Vance's wife to simply being Clara Vance, the lawyer who masterfully handled the Henderson acquisition, who never missed a deadline despite immense personal turmoil, who maintained absolute professional composure when faced with an opposing counsel who happened to be her ex-husband's best friend from college. About a year after the divorce was finalized, Julian's professional freefall had become common knowledge. The Sterling account was only the beginning. Arthur's quiet withdrawal of his powerful social support, the introductions, the country club memberships, the invitations to influential holiday parties, had systematically dismantled the network that had propped up Julian's career for years. Sophie had left the agency 6 weeks after the divorce papers were signed. The office rumor mill claimed she had moved to Seattle with a tech bro she'd met at a conference. I only ran into Julian once, at a large charity gala I attended with a group of colleagues. He looked older, smaller, more subdued. We shared a polite, distant nod across the crowded room, two strangers who once promised each other forever. "Are you okay?" Olivia whispered, noticing the exchange. I smiled, a real smile this time. "I'm great," I replied, and I meant it. Standing there in a dress I had picked out myself, surrounded by colleagues who respected me for my mind and my work, I finally recognized the woman I had become. I was not a victim of betrayal. I was not an extension of someone else's life. I was entirely my own person, stronger, not in spite of the damage, but because of it. The marriage was over, but I was not. The perfect illusion had been shattered, and in its place something far more precious had been revealed: reality, strength, freedom, and finally, peace. If Clara's journey from devastation to self-discovery resonated with you, please consider subscribing. These stories of women who find their strength and reclaim their power are important, and they deserve to be shared. Every single subscription means one more person is reminded that they are worth fighting for, even if, at first, they have to fight for themselves alone. Thank you for being here. End of story.